Good evening. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started in just a moment. We're going to give everyone a few more seconds to join the Zoom, and we'll get started shortly.
Do you want the interpreter to interpret that?
Yeah, go ahead, Claudia.
Ok. Buenas tardes. Gracias por unirse a esta junta. Vamos a comenzar en un momento. Vamos a dar la oportunidad a todas las personas que se puedan unir al Zoom. En unos momentos vamos a comenzar.
Okay, and I think we will go ahead and get started. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us for this informational community session for the Santa Cruz Branch Rail Line Corridor Climate Resilience Study. My name is Tiffany Mendoza, and I will be moderating tonight's meeting. Before we jump into the presentation, I will go over a few Zoom logistics. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the project website.
Vamos a comenzar. Entonces, gracias para unirse a esta sesión comunitaria de información en relación a el estudio de resiliencia climática de la línea ferroviaria del corredor de Santa Cruz. La señorita Tiffany Mendoza va a moderar esta presentación y antes de comenzar vamos a dar una explicación en relación a Zoom. Y esta junta está siendo grabada también y la vamos a colocar. Este proyecto va a ser colocado en nuestra página de la red. Gracias.
Thank you. And as you can hear, tonight's meeting is being hosted in English and Spanish. In just a few minutes, we will open the audio channels. This will give you access to both of the Spanish and English audio channels. In order to access those, you'll be able to click an interpretation button, which will show as a globe icon in the Zoom taskbar. And I will pause so that Claudia can repeat that message.
Y como ustedes pueden escuchar, esta junta esta tarde está siendo presentada en el idioma inglés y español. En unos minutos vamos a abrir los dos canales del audio y esto les puede dar a ustedes acceso a tener a elegir el canal de inglés o español en orden de tener acceso a ellos. Pueden ustedes hacer un clic en el botón de interpretación que se va a mostrar en la barra de Zoom como un globo terráqueo.
Okay, thank you. We now invite participants to join the interpretation audio channels by clicking either the Spanish or English buttons. All participants and panelists are encouraged to choose a language. If you speak English, please select the English channel.
Muchas gracias. Y ahora invitamos a los participantes que se puedan unir al canal de audio de interpretación. Pueden hacer un clic, ya sea en el botón de inglés o español.
Okay, and those channels are now open. We also have closed captioning available. If you would like to use this option, please click the CC icon in the Zoom taskbar and then select subtitles to view those on screen or live transcript to see the full transcript on the side panel. If you need technical support this evening, please click on the Q&A button and describe the issue you're having there, and our team will respond to help you. Tonight's meeting format includes a presentation followed by a question and answer session. To ask a question, please use the Q&A button in the meeting taskbar to type in your question. We encourage you to enter your questions throughout the presentation, and we will address those at the end of the presentation. For those of you who are participating in person at the RTC conference room, you can please write your questions on the paper provided and provide them to the RTC staff in the room, and they will submit your questions on your behalf. And at this time, I'll turn the presentation over to Amanda Marino, a transportation planner with the Santa Cruz County Regional Transportation Commission. Amanda.
Thanks, Tiffany. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today for the Santa Cruz Branch Rail Line Corridor Climate Resilience Planning Study Informational Community Session. Like Tiffany mentioned, my name is Amanda Marino, and I'm a transportation planner at the Santa Cruz County Regional Transportation Commission and serve as the project manager for the study. I'm also joined by Senior Transportation Planner Grace Blakesley, as well as the HDR team, who will be available to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. Go to the next slide. The agenda for today's informational session includes starting out with the introduction and a background of the study. We will then discuss the climate resilience study process, climate resilience hazards and definitions, site-specific hazards and concepts, relocation concepts, evaluation criteria, and concluding with the schedule and next steps. Go to the next slide. All right, the next slide. Thanks, Tiffany. You can go to the next slide. Perfect background. So to give some background, the RTC purchased the Santa Cruz Branch Rail Line in 2012, which is a 32-mile corridor that traverses Santa Cruz County, connecting Davenport to Watsonville. The RTC purchased the rail line to preserve the corridor for future transportation use. The RTC is responsible to plan for and protect this transportation asset for public use, which includes planning for climate hazard impacts to ensure that the corridor is resilient and can be used for future generations. More recently, in December of 2025, the RTC took action on the Zeppert Final Project Concept Report and directed staff to take actions needed to implement the interim trail for the short-term use of the corridor. Therefore, the scope of this climate resilience study considers both the proposed short and long-term transportation use, which includes analyzing and developing concepts for the interim trail in the short term and passenger freight rail alongside a trail in the long term, which I will get into more into detail in this presentation. All right, you can go to the next slide. So we'll be starting with the climate resilience study process. Next slide. In January 2025, the RTC completed the Climate Adaptation Vulnerability Assessment, otherwise known as CAVA. This study assessed climate change-related vulnerabilities to the unincorporated Santa Cruz County roads and the Santa Cruz Branch Rail Line. Methods included developing hazard projections and consequence scoring to produce an overall risk prioritization tool that ranked locations to prioritize for further climate analysis to enhance resiliency at these locations. Go to the next slide. Based on the initial findings from CAVA, the RTC was awarded a Caltrans Adaptation Planning Grant to further evaluate the climate hazards at 4 vulnerable sites on the Santa Cruz Branch Rail Line. The study evaluates the current conditions today and how they will change over time due to the impacts of climate hazards. Informed by the climate hazard analysis, the study will develop resilient concepts for these 4 sites to ensure that the corridor can withstand future impacts. On the map, the line shown in blue is the Santa Cruz Branch Rail Line, and the identified vulnerable locations are shown on the orange dots. At the Capitola Bluffs, La Selva Manresa Bluffs, and Harkins Slough Rail Crossing, resilient concepts will be developed for both the interim trail in the short term and passenger and freight rail alongside a trail in the long term. At the Pajaro River Rail Bridge, the study will develop resilient concepts for passenger and freight rail, as there are currently plans underway for a trail-only bridge crossing the Pajaro River at Rodriguez Street. This was determined in the Zeppert Final Concept Report. All right, next slide. To develop concepts for the Santa Cruz Branch Rail Line that consider climate hazards, we are going through the following steps in the study. First, in stage 1 of the study, we assessed the climate hazards, which included evaluating the impacts of riverine flooding, and coastal erosion over time. The next step in stage 2, where we're currently at, is to use the climate analysis to coordinate with resource agencies such as the California Coastal Commission, partner agencies, and stakeholders to explore a variety of concepts that would inform design development and permitting that are resilient to climate hazards. Following the concept development in Stage 3, our team will evaluate the advantages and disadvantages of each option using a set of evaluation criteria to identify the preferred concept for both the short-term and long-term use of the corridor, which will be in Stage 4. Today, we will present a variety of preliminary concepts and the draft evaluation criteria for you to review and to provide input on. All right, next slide. Like I mentioned previously, the RTC is currently planning for 2 separate uses for the corridor for both the short and long-term use. The climate hazard projections used for the climate hazard analysis are associated with different timeframes for the interim trail in the short term and passenger freight rail and trail in the long term. The time horizons were determined using the most recently adopted California State Sea Level Rise guidance. The guidance determines different time horizons based on the type of infrastructure needed for the specific use and the estimated life of the associated use. The interim trail short-term concepts consider climate hazard projections through 2080. The rail and trail long-term design concepts consider climate hazard projections through 2150. All right, next slide. In this section, we'll give an overview of how we conducted the climate hazard analysis and what we found. Next slide. So let's start with, what is a hazard? A hazard is an undesirable event that could occur. The study focuses on 2 main hazards impacting the corridor, which include flooding and coastal erosion. River flooding can happen when there is a large rainstorm. The photo on the left is showing river flooding in Pajaro from a few years ago. Coastal flooding can happen when there is a very high tide or low pressure system. Coastal erosion is when the beach or bluff washes away. This can happen when the force of waves crash against the land over and over again. This photo is a storm wave in Pleasure Point, for example. All right, the next slide. So what is the role of climate change? Although Santa Cruz County already experiences river flooding, coastal erosion, these hazards are going to get worse in the future because of climate change. That's why you will sometimes hear these referred to as climate hazards. Climate change will cause more storms and rain to occur, which can exacerbate the frequency and magnitude of flooding events. Climate change can increase coastal erosion over time due to sea level rise and can be worse during storms, which also increase due to climate change. All right, next slide. So where is the problem? Both the Capitola Bluff and La Selva Manresa Bluffs face high risk of coastal erosion. Go to the next slide. Whereas at Harkin Slough Rail Crossing and the Pajaro River Rail Bridge faces river flood hazards. You can go to the next slide. So what do we do about it? So after understanding the hazards, the next step is to look into a range of options to address the hazards at each site. Typically, a framework that is used to develop alternatives is protect, accommodate, and retreat. This framework assists planners and designers at making sure they have looked into a complete suite of options, from smaller measures to relocation. And this is to do our due diligence in coordination with resource agencies, exploring options that are resilient to inform design and permitting processes. Protect strategies focus on preventing the hazard from impacting the site or facility. An example of this can be constructing a flood wall or placing erosion protection on a slope. These usually leave the facility in the same location. Accommodate strategies allow the hazard to occur, but improve the facility's ability to withstand it or bounce back afterwards. An example is elevating a structure above an expected flood elevation or planning for post-flood maintenance. Retreat means to relocate the facility away from the hazard. In the case of the trail or rail and trail project, an example could be to follow a different alignment inland. For the short-term trail, we're considering protect, accommodate concepts to improve the resilience of the potential interim trail project. Retreat was determined not to be necessary because of the intent of the interim trail is to be expected to be completed in the near term within the existing corridor. For the long-term rail and trail, we're considering all three strategies. Go to the next slide. So now we'll get into the site-specific hazards and concepts. Go to the next slide. Bluff retreat and erosion is the main climate hazard at Capitola Bluffs. At the Capitola Bluffs, the bluff is very steep and periodically erodes. This erosion is primarily caused by waves impacting the bottom of the bluff face. There, the rock wears away, undercutting the upper bluff. When the undercut is large enough or creates a fracture, the slope fails. The upper bluff material falls onto the beach and breaks apart. For some time, that material naturally protects the toe of the bluff, but eventually it gets displaced and the cycle repeats. As sea levels rise, the waves would hit the face of the bluff more often, increasing erosion. Accounting for sea level rise, the bluff retreat is expected to threaten the current alignment around 2100, the year of 2100. So the interim trail is likely to be okay at the current alignment. However, this also means that the long-term rail and trail project is likely to be threatened by erosion. The top of the bluff is projected to reach Park Avenue by around 2150, as shown in the yellow dotted line. All right, go to the next slide. Based on the type and scale of erosion, many concepts are being developed. This slide shows some of the measures that could help protect the bluff or reduce erosion in the short term. Retaining walls are often considered to protect infrastructure. However, when placed to prevent a bluff from eroding, they often cause the beach in front of them or down current, in this case east, to shrink. They also often increase erosion at either ends of the wall. The next photo shows rock slope protection. This is basically a pile of rocks placed in front of the bluff, but there are design calculations that determine how big each rock should be and how many of them to place. This can be effective, but even when designed properly, the rocks move over time and need to be replenished. In addition, it takes up space on the beach because the rocks have to be placed at the slope to be stable. The rocks have similar downsides to retaining walls, but they are more resilient because as the beach shifts, the rocks can move and adapt. Beach nourishment is placing sand from some other source at the base of the bluff. This is often used as a mitigation for retaining walls or rock slope protections, beach impacts, but it can also be used to build up the beach and protect the bluff from breaking waves. However, the sand does need to come from somewhere and it will need to be replenished over time. Finally, sand retaining groins are shown. These are rock jetties that stick out from the beach. They cause sand that was being transported along shore to build up on the beach. However, they also may have the side effect of reducing the beach width adjacent. At this site, that would mean reducing the beach width east of the bluffs. Because these concepts are best suited for shorter-term protection, longer-term concepts are also being considered. Go to the next slide. In the long term, we are also evaluating constructing approximately a 1,200-foot long buried bridge in the existing alignment. This is otherwise known as a buried viaduct. And this would be slightly shifted towards Park Avenue. As the bluff erodes naturally, the bridge becomes visible. Based on the analysis, the bridge is likely to become visible towards the end of the century. Okay, go to the next slide. At La Selva Manresa Bluffs, this figure shows the projected range that the top of the bluff is likely to lie within around the year 2080, shown in the red dotted line, and 2150, shown in the yellow dotted line. The alignment is currently threatened by coastal erosion due to rainfall, runoff, and earthquake-driven mechanisms that I will get into in more detail on the next slide. You can go to the next slide now. Thank you. The coastal erosion process at La Selva Manresa Bluff differs from the erosion occurring at Capitola. At La Selva and Manresa, the bluffs are rounded and are made of material that is less firm. Currently, the erosion that has been observed here is mostly due to rainfall, runoff, groundwater, foot traffic, and earthquakes. Therefore, in the short term, measures that are being considered address this type of erosion. However, as sea levels rise, waves will reach the toe of the bluff more often. Based on the analysis, the main mechanism of bluff erosion is expected to change to be wave-driven around the mid-century. Erosion caused by waves is much faster, so when this happens, bluff retreat is expected to occur at a faster rate than what has been observed in the past. Therefore, different concepts are being developed to address future wave erosion and the long-term bluff retreat. Go to the next slide. Here are some concepts being considered for the short term for La Selva and Manresa Bluffs. First, we have drainage improvements. Then we have vegetation restoration and dune creation. These concepts could be implemented in the short term and can provide some reduction in erosion until around the mid-century. Due to the type of underlying material, there would be some spot failures on the slope, which would likely need spot repairs with rock slope protection to rebuild that part of the slope. And like I mentioned earlier, we have rock slope protection, and that is also being considered at the Capitola Bluffs. All right, next slide. In the long term, those measures would stop being effective as wave-driven erosion increases. Since the bluff material is not very strong, short-term protective measures may not be sufficient through 2080, and we are unlikely to be effective all the way into 2150 planning horizon. Therefore, alternatives that would be more resilient are being explored. This can also include a buried bridge or a viaduct that is shown on this slide. We're estimating this would need to be about 3,000 feet long. The bridge would not be visible when first constructed, but as the bluff face erodes, it would become visible, likely towards the end of the century. This alternative allows the bluff to retreat naturally and preserves the visual nature of the bluff face while allowing for long-term infrastructure within the existing corridor. All right, you can go to the next slide. At Harking Slough, the main hazard is flooding. The top elevation of the bridge and the embankment crossing the slough is at an elevation that would flood during a 100-year storm event. This flooding is generally due to rainfall and runoff, not due to tide elevations. Therefore, to build a rail alignment at this location, the profile would need to be raised above water levels. This is true in the current conditions as well as accounting future conditions considering climate change. Go to the next slide. Several alternatives for raising the profile within the current corridor are being evaluated to link the bridge to the rail alignment. The first includes retrofitting the existing bridge. This can be a short-term alternative for an interim trail. The next two concepts involve replacing the bridge with an elevated bridge. The first maintains roughly the same opening width. The second has a longer opening, which provides environmental benefits by increasing flow and wildlife passage under the bridge on a daily basis. In the interim trail concepts, for both of these bridge replacements, the embankments adjacent to the bridge would be elevated for a few hundred feet on either side to get up to the new bridge elevation, but the rest of the embankment would remain at the current elevation. In the long-term rail and trail concept, the embankment would also be raised above the flood elevation. Raising the alignment would require a large area of the wetland to be filled, or a very extensive retaining wall system, and was therefore only included in the longer-term concepts. The fourth concept shown within the existing alignment is to remove the existing bridge and embankment entirely and replace it with a viaduct across the entire slough. This would be approximately 2,000 feet long. This would have temporary environmental impacts during construction, but would restore the slough to a more natural condition after construction by allowing flow and wildlife in the slough to move freely. All right, go to the next slide. The rail alignment currently crosses the Pajaro River at Walker Street. The United States Army Corps of Engineers plans to construct levees along the Pajaro River, which would increase water surface elevations. This means that any replacement bridge would typically need to be raised higher than the current bridge to meet freeboard requirements. The rail bridge would need to be raised by about 8 feet to accommodate the current climate conditions with the levees constructed. In the future, precipitation rates are projected to increase, as are sea levels. At the site with the levees constructed, water levels through 2150 will mostly change due to rainfall increases rather than due to sea level rise. Due to climate change impacts, the bridge raised to 8 feet will not meet freeboard requirements in the future and could cause the bridge to flood. At the Pajaro River Bridge, we are not considering an interim trail concept in this study, as there are currently plans underway to construct a trail-only bridge at Rodriguez Street, determined in the Zeppert concept report, like I mentioned earlier. Go to the next slide. To address the increased water levels from climate change, an alternative that we're considering is to raise the bridge approximately 8 feet to accommodate current water levels with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers levee project. This would also include installing floodgates that would close when water levels rise due to climate change impacts. This means that there will be no rail service during those times, and the frequency of closures would increase over time. Go to the next slide. Another option is to raise the bridge higher. This would be on a viaduct, and it would be approximately 4,000 feet long. This would be to accommodate the higher water levels due to climate change. Although the viaduct would only need to be 8 feet higher to accommodate the water levels in the river currently, our team has found it will need to be 7 feet high to allow traffic on Riverside Drive to pass underneath. The rail profile would need to be elevated on a bridge adjacent to Walker Street until it can gradually come back down to grade. Freight trains would have to zigzag back and forth to get down to the elevation of the station. This could also impact traffic on Walker Street. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Relocation is a strategy to retreat from climate hazards. This would be to move the infrastructure away from the coast or the hazard that's presented. We have considered multiple relocation concepts for each site. These options are evaluated so that the RTC can demonstrate in future permitting agency applications that relocation alternatives were evaluated and why they were selected or not. Relocation options were identified with the following considerations in mind: maximum slopes or inclines that passenger rail and freight rail can accommodate. This could be, for example, passenger rail is more flexible and can be built at a higher slope. We're also considering the Watsonville Airport's airspace, the 2150 planning horizon, and maintaining the existing freight connection in Watsonville. Additionally, the project team has worked to minimize the following impacts as much as possible, which include impacts to properties, existing structures, and vehicle traffic. All right, you can go to the next slide. The first relocation alignment at the Capitola Bluffs would keep the alignment near the coast. This would follow Park Avenue for both freight and passenger rail. However, Park Avenue is not wide enough to accommodate vehicle, rail, and trail traffic at grade. So the Park Avenue rail alignment would have to be on a viaduct structure. A second realignment avoids the bluff retreat entirely and would place the freight and passenger rail alignment inland to follow Kennedy Drive and Monterey Avenue. This alignment would also be on a viaduct. Again, because of the constrained right-of-way, we are considering this concept on a raised structure where the rail service is elevated above the roadway to avoid impacts. Go to the next slide. There are two relocation options considered at this location for the La Selva and Manresa Bluffs. The first option would be to relocate freight and passenger rail to Highway 1. This would then have to connect to the existing rail alignment at Buena Vista Drive to accommodate grading levels for freight. The second relocation option includes separating the freight and passenger rail alignments. Freight rail would remain in the current alignment, and passenger rail would follow the Highway 1 corridor to Watsonville. Go to the next slide. At Harkins Slough, one option is to relocate the rail alignment for both freight and passenger rail to San Andreas Road. This would be parallel to the planned alignment for the multi-use trail. The next option would be to separate freight and passenger rail. Freight rail would remain in the current alignment and passenger rail would be moved to Highway 1. All right, you can go to the next slide. At the Pajaro River Rail Bridge, to avoid constraints due to the proposed levees and the impacts of a raised viaduct to the freight rail connection at Walker Street, another alternative of relocating the bridge is to relocate the bridge southwest about 1,500 feet of the existing rail bridge. This would avoid impacts to Walker Street and adjacent properties, but would require the future Watsonville station to be located along Riverside Drive instead of at the preferred downtown location. The freight alignment could stay at the current alignment or follow the new alignment with the spur connection in Watsonville. All right, next slide. Now, in order to evaluate each of the concepts to determine the preferred alternative for both the short and long-term use, our team has developed a set of evaluation criteria. The evaluation criteria will be applied separately for each site for both the short-term and long-term corridor uses. You can go to the next slide. So how will the concepts be evaluated? The first evaluation criteria, resilience, would help us answer the question, is the concept resilient, which is the primary focus of the study. We are also evaluating the cost implications for each design, as well as assessing other potential environmental impacts and how does the design affect public access. We also want to compare the multimodal and active transportation benefits which include benefits to transit-dependent and underserved populations. For example, this could differ between concepts based on how a particular concept might connect or not connect to nearby facilities. And as well, a part of the evaluation criteria is to consider public and stakeholder input. Go to the next slide. All right, so now we'll get into the schedule and next steps of the study. To the next slide. We are currently wrapping up phase 1, the existing conditions assessment, which includes data collection and climate hazard analysis, and beginning phase 2, the alternative project concept identification, including the concept development and feasibility opportunities analysis. In the fall of 2026, we will begin the climate resilience plan development, incorporating public input and stakeholder review, where we will be hosting additional opportunities for input. In the summer of 2027, we will publish the final climate resilience plan for acceptance and approval. You can go to the next slide. In the final climate resilience plan for the corridor, the study will identify recommendations for the RTC to carry forward in future planning efforts for the interim trail, ultimate trail, and freight and passenger rail at these 4 locations. The recommendations will be incorporated into project descriptions for future environmental review and/or permitting and construction. All right, go to the next slide. We have some upcoming community meetings that you are all welcome to attend if interested. We have our first one will be on June 9th. This will be from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at the Aptos Grange Community Center, as well as on June 10th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. We'll also be hosting a workshop at the Watsonville Civic Plaza in the community room located on the 4th floor of the building. We are also planning to bring this item to the RTC Commission meeting on June 11th. All right, next slide.
All right, and thank you, Amanda. That concludes our presentation portion of the meeting. We will now move into the question and answer session. As a reminder, you can enter any questions into the Q&A box that's located in the Zoom taskbar. Or for anybody participating in person in the RTC conference room, you can write them on the paper provided and provide them to RTC's staff person who will enter them on your behalf. And I will note that we don't currently have any questions, so I think we're going to just pause for a moment to allow people to enter any questions into the Q&A box. Then we do have time this evening. We'd be happy to answer those.
I think I see a hand raised, but
Oh, thank you, Amanda. So this evening we're not taking unmuting and taking verbal questions. We're asking everybody participating tonight to enter written questions into the chat. So if you can locate on your Zoom toolbar that Q&A button and enter any questions there. And I see a few questions are coming in now, so give us just a moment. Okay, thank you. I'm going to read out the first question. So the first question asks, the slides did not say if the concepts are short-term or long-term. Can you clarify?
yeah, I can clarify. We are developing concepts for both the short term and long term. We did mention there are some short term concepts for all the locations for the interim, as well as some of the long term. I don't know if, Tiffany, if you want to go back to some of the slides, but I just want to clarify that there are concepts for both uses of the corridor.
Sure. Give me just a moment. Do you want to look at Capitola as an example?
Yeah, so for example, for the short term, we're considering a retaining wall, rock slope protection, beach nourishment, or sand retaining groins. They can be a combination of all or separately, but these are the short-term concepts, as well as, if you want to go to the next slide, Tiffany, we're also considering a buried viaduct. That's that buried bridge that I mentioned before that'll erode away over time. And that is a long-term proposed concept for this location. And they will all be evaluated with the evaluation criteria.
Okay. Thank you, Amanda. The next question asks, if the RTC focused on a trail-only scenario, how soon could a trail-only scenario be built?
I think maybe Senior Transportation Planner Grace Blakesley might be able to answer this one.
Yeah,
Grace,
thank
if you're
you.
able
And I
to.
think it was a great presentation, Amanda. This is really good information for everyone. I wanted to add before I jump into the answering the next question about the time frame. There's different time horizons we're looking at, and sometimes we want to think about how far ahead we're looking. So we're looking at a 2080 time horizon for the interim trail, and then a 2150 for the passenger rail and trail project. And it might seem really far out, but we just kind of I wanted to distinguish between, what that's looking like and kind of help us understand in our conversation with the public why we might be looking at different scenarios for different projects. So the time horizon is important because the hazards differ when we make those kinds of projections. In terms of the time frame for the project, we have to make some assumptions when we do this kind of work. So what we're assuming now for an interim trail is that we would be ending construction around 2030, and that the project then would have a life of at least 50 years. And we've had some questions about why that time frame. And in part, it's because what we see is for recreational and active transportation trails, there we have some more adaptability. So we can kind of modify the design over time if we need to, if we're affected by climate hazards, where when we look at a passenger rail time frame and the infrastructure required for that, it's more substantial and requires a longer look ahead. So those are kind of some information about the longer time frame. But in terms of the trail construction, right now we think that project that the time frame would be completed around the 2030 time frame.
Great. Thank you, Grace. We have another question that's also related to the interim trail that asks if you can provide an estimate for when a decision will be made on whether or not to remove any parts of the rail line for the interim trail, if that is selected as a preferred alternative.
Do you want to take a stab at answering that,
Sure.
Grace? Okay.
Happy to. So the concept for an interim trail as defined previously is to remove the rails and then construct the trail in place of the current tracks. The RTC Commission directed staff at our December meeting in 2025 to look at options under which we could construct an interim trail without removing the tracks. So staff, in coordination with the City of County Santa Cruz, who are the project sponsors, have been working on that, and will bring information back to the commission at their August meeting to discuss any options there might be to construct an interim trail condition and preserve the tracks. So the August timeframe is what we're looking at in terms of that design. However, prior designs were looking at an interim trail condition which removed the tracks. And that's what we're assuming here in terms of the climate hazards and potential design options and concepts for an interim trail.
Okay, thank you again, Grace. Let me see what other questions we have here. My next question asks, how does this work dovetail with the step 2 of the corridor ID program, environmental analysis to be conducted by Caltrans? Amanda, do you want to?
Do you want me to go ahead, Amanda?
Yeah.
I think Grace might have some more background.
That's a really good
Yeah.
question. So for this step 2, we're really looking at or the state is looking at advancing what we're calling in Santa Cruz a zero emission passenger rail project, but advancing passenger rail. And it supports the environmental document development for this project. And that's one of the main reasons that RTC has taken on this planning effort, and we think why Caltrans has supported us through their Caltrans planning grant and doing this work, is to really come up with a project definition that looks at all of the potential, excuse me, all of the potential alignments, considering future climate hazards in these locations. So the simple answer, I would say, is this helps us define the project that would be evaluated in a future environmental document through a corridor ID process, should that be funded.
Okay, thank you, Grace. The next question is related to the interim trail and asks, is the interim trail scenario going to be routed through the Harkins Slough or along the other route on San Andreas Boulevard?
I can take a first go. So for this study, we're considering concepts for an interim trail located on the existing alignment. But we're also, I believe, and Grace, you can clarify me, that there's going to be a multi-use trail that is planned for San Andreas Boulevard as a part of the Zeppert concept report. But you might, Grace, if you want to clarify. But for this study, we are considering concepts on the existing alignment through Harkins Slough.
I concur. For the interim trail, we are assuming that the interim trail would follow the existing rail corridor through that area, and that's some of the concepts that Amanda showed in her presentation.
Okay, thank you both. The next question asks, if the passenger rail is never built, have you considered abandonment of the freight line and only the trail option is mitigated?
Okay. What I would say is the commission has directed us to a staff to look at a short-term project that constructs a trail in the interim condition and to pursue rail in the long term. So that's why this project and the planning effort, not project, this planning effort reflects that direction.
Okay, thank you, Grace. We have received a couple more questions, so I'm just trying to get them sorted out here. Okay, the next one is there now a different designation for an interim trail that doesn't preserve the tracks and just builds a simple trail?
So I think this is actually a similar answer to a previous question, and I'm happy to take a follow-up question if it helps provide more clarification. But the answer is the commission directed our staff to look at options for an interim trail that could preserve the rails. And so the city and the county, in coordination with the RTC, have been analyzing options with the kind of thinking about how we can do that within our available resources. And we're plan to bring that information to the commission at their August meeting for their consideration. And if there's a follow-up question, I'm happy to answer in more detail. I don't mean to be vague there, just trying to understand the focus of the question there.
Okay, thank you, Grace. We'll be on the lookout for a follow-up. I'm going to ask a question that hopefully has an easy answer now. Will the recording and slides from tonight's presentation be posted on the project website? Amanda, do you want to take that one?
Yes, it will be. So if you want to send this to any of your friends, neighbors, interest groups, or anyone, that'd be great to spread the word about this. And as well, we'll be hosting some in-person workshops that I mentioned earlier. So please share with your networks.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. And the next question asks, in light of the dramatic fuel prices, is there an avenue to fast track trail construction to accommodate the likely increase of bike and pedestrian traffic on our streets?
I can answer that. I mean, like Grace mentioned earlier, the construction is anticipated to be in 2030. I'm not sure about the fast track of the trail construction, but right now 2030 is the anticipated construction of the interim trail. But Grace, maybe if you want to expand on
I
that.
can elaborate on that. It's always an interesting question to me because what I think is the members of the public think that the construction is the longest part of the project. When you're working in this arena, the longest part of the project is the permitting and the planning and getting all the agreements that are needed in place, which is not necessarily the interesting or exciting part on the public facing side of it. But we're working on that. We're going really fast as we can. Right now, the focus of these projects for the interim trail is to follow the commission's directive to advance a final design. We are still waiting for the commission's direction on what design to pursue for the interim trail. As I mentioned, whether it maintains the rails in place or the tracks in place or removes them. So there's still some decisions to be made on the design that we're advancing. And then there's also the really important part of the permitting and making sure that we're meeting all of our funding agreements. And I'm going to take the opportunity to point out one of the reasons that we're working on this study and that we've sought funding for it is because early coordination with the environmental resources agencies is essential to keep this moving forward as fast as possible, and looking all the alternatives to how to minimize impacts to environmental resources and to propose a design that is climate resilient is a key piece of that. So it may not be immediately apparent how important this study is for future implementation of the project, but that is the reason that RTC tries to get ahead of these things and pursue planning funds for that work. So hopefully that's not too jargony, but it does take time. We can't streamline it because of increasing prices unless there's direction or additional resources or streamlining opportunities. But this work that we're doing is really getting ahead of a lot of those questions so that we can ensure that we can get under construction as soon as possible.
Thank you, Grace. And, we have a lot of questions coming in, or a handful of questions anyways, coming in that are kind of related to that response and a few of the other responses. So I'm going to kind of give you a two at once here. But the next two questions are, does the ZEPERT, which is the Zero Emission Passenger Rail and Trail Project, does that EIR as currently defined take into consideration a trail-only scenario? And kind of on that same path as the trail-only question, would removing the need to preserve rail reduce the effort for a trail-only scenario? Maybe those two are too much to combine together, so feel
That's
free to take
okay.
them one at a time, but I know the answers are all interrelated here.
Well, I want to do my best to provide the most direct answer. So for the first question, it's actually really related to what I just stated, which is the work that we're doing is to help define not only what would be considered for a trail design, but also for a ZEPERT design. So right now, the RTC hasn't initiated work on a environmental document for the zero emission passenger rail and trail project. They're seeking funding to do so. And if you're familiar with environmental analysis, it's helpful to have a lot of the work done prior to that, where you can really try to understand what the different project concepts are before you initiate that work. So that's what we're doing right now, is trying to evaluate under what design should be evaluated in an environmental document at these 4 locations that Amanda described. So this work informs what would be pursued in the environmental document. Can you repeat the second question about the interim trail?
Yeah, I sure can. It was, would removing the need to preserve rail significantly reduce the effort for a trail-only scenario?
I'd say that answer is unknown at this time. We're looking at different options, and then whatever concept is directed by the RTC would need to go through permitting requirements, and that's to be determined how we would work with permitting agencies and their response for allowing the project to move forward.
Okay.
And again, please follow up with more details if I'm not getting at the crux of your question. I'm happy to respond with the new information I have.
Okay, thank you, Grace. Shifting gears a little bit, we had two questions that are a little lengthy, so I'm just going to paraphrase it a bit here. But the question relates to, has the RTC considered a PRT system, which I believe is Personal Rapid Transit System, correct me if that's wrong, and talks about with a PRT system, give some details about what that would look like with an 18-foot high guideway supported by structural poles about 4 to 6 feet off the ground. It's a transit system capable of reducing congestion, and you could construct the trail underneath the guideway for the PRT system. So to summarize that again, the question is, has RTC considered that system?
I'm assuming that the question is related to a PRT system that is located on the Santa Cruz Branch rail line. That's an assumption I'm making. The analysis done around 2021 related to transit options on the Santa Cruz Branch rail line did, at a high level, look at a range of transit options, including PRT, and they call it the universe of options, but they did not go forward with a more detailed analysis of PRT at that time. So the most current ZEPERT analysis did not evaluate a PRT system.
Okay, thank you, Grace. Okay. Sorry, regrouping here on the next couple of questions. I think the next question here asks, what are the concepts for roads being flooded by climate change? Or is that a separate study?
I can answer that, Grace. So, like I mentioned before and previously in the presentation, in January of 2025, the RTC completed the Climate Adaptation Vulnerability Assessment. So that was the CAVA study. And that study included the unincorporated Santa Cruz County roads, as well as the Santa Cruz Branch Rail Line. And for this study, we're only focusing on the Santa Cruz Branch Rail Line corridor at those four locations. And this was through a Caltrans adaptation planning grant. But throughout the county, there are various different climate resilience studies underway. But this study in particular only focuses on those four locations on the rail line.
All right, thank you, Amanda. And I think the next question is, will the interim trail have separate areas for walkers and for bicycle riders and e-bike riders?
Grace, do you want to take I know you're more involved with the design of specifically.
Yeah, I'd be happy to try to answer that. So the when we're thinking about the interim trail, the design that I'm referring to, is considered what I call like the schematic design that was evaluated as part of the trail project that we refer to for segment 9 to 11, which extends from the San Lorenzo River to State Park Drive. So that's the design that we're looking at right now based on the commission's direction. The starting point there is what was included in the schematic design evaluated in the environmental impact report. So just kind of want to give you a baseline of where that starting point is. And what that looked at was a 16-foot wide trail. And it did not specify if there would be separation of facilities. A 16-foot wide trail would allow for a delineation of bicycles and pedestrians, but that has yet to be determined through the design process, should the commission, continue to direct the city and county to pursue those design options. So I have to say it's no designation for e-bikes versus bicyclists has been determined. There is an option based on the width that the bicyclists and pedestrians could be separated, but that's still to be determined.
Okay, thank you both again. Okay, we have just a few more questions here. The next one is a little bit longer, but I will read the whole question. And this question is regarding the 4 high vulnerability points in this study, Capitola, La Selva, Arkan Slough, and Pajaro River. We're looking at massive costs for hardening legacy infrastructure. Are we evaluating lightweight modular structural alternatives, such as elevated autonomous guideways that reduce the load on these bluffs compared to heavy rail? And if we build for heavy rail tonnage now, we are essentially overbuilding for a future that requires lightweight climate adaptive resilience. I know that was a mouthful. Amanda or Grace, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I can start, and then Grace, if you want to fill in where I leave off. So, right now we're using the Zeppert concept report as a baseline to inform the concept development as well as the interim trail, which was also directed by our commission to pursue and plan for. So those are right now the two uses that our commission has directed us to analyze and to develop concepts for with the input of the climate hazard analysis. And in the scope which we receive from Caltrans, it's the same, where we are planning with the Zeppert as the baseline, and going off of what our commission has directed us to study and plan for. And that was also determined in the transit corridor analysis that Grace mentioned that was done in 2021, where they analyzed a variety of uses for the corridor, and our commission directed us to produce a Zeppert concept report. So that's why we're using the Zeppert use as well as the interim trail. And Grace, if I left anything out, any context of why, can fill in.
That makes a lot of sense. And this is a question that we've been asked before. And so I hope we can try to give some context. But in addition to what Amanda was saying, really these concepts that we're looking at apply to all of those uses. How they would be constructed and the cost might vary. But in terms of the protect, adapt, or relocate, retreat concepts, it applies to all of those uses in one way or another. So Jen might be able to provide, from HDR, might be able to provide more detailed answer in terms of the engineering side, but I think that's the simple answer is that the idea of protecting a facility using the examples that Amanda provided, or adapting, for example, using a viaduct that's allows the beach to replenish and the coastal bluff to retreat, or a relocation, that applies to all of the uses that were in the question as I understand it. So more detailed engineering would need to be conducted, and that might impact what we're looking at in terms of cost, but the general concepts apply to all of those uses.
Thanks, Grace. Hi, I'm Jen Abrams with HDR. I'm an engineer, and just I want to clarify with respect to that question as well. Just that even if the alternatives that you're proposing there are lightweight, that the bluff erosion that's being seen and projected into the future isn't caused by the loads of the freight on the rail line, and therefore, and all these structural alternatives generally would still require a foundation. And so, like Grace and Amanda are saying, the climate hazard would still potentially be a threat to these because those foundations might be situated within a bluff that could in the future erode. But again, yes, the study is looking at resilience alternatives that could, vary or be applied to multiple different types of uses.
Okay, thank you all. I do want to recognize we received another comment and question from kind of related to that response from the same participant. I think mostly that question has been addressed, but I just wanted to recognize that that one's in there and note that, we are recording all of the questions and comments that have been provided in the Q&A for follow-up later. And I know we will be adjourning at around 7:15 today, so we have just a few more questions for that. So the next one asks if there is any ballpark estimate for the cost of the 3,000-foot long viaduct at La Selva, or in general, is there a cost per foot number that could be used?
I can start off and then maybe I'll direct to Jen. She might have some more information, but cost will be included in the evaluation criteria in this next stage of the study. But Jen, I don't know if you have, I guess, maybe like a cost per foot or something that would be associated to a viaduct at this point. But
We are developing cost estimates at a high level based on the designs. Currently, we're still piecing those because they're intended to be included in that evaluation that's coming up during the summer, which we would then show during the outreach round coming later in this year. So that will be, answered, but at the moment we're still, based on the site specifics, we want to make sure we're getting a good number or a decent estimate.
Okay. Thank you, Jen. And the next question is inquiring, with rail on pause, would rail next to trail solutions be implemented prior to that position being changed, or will only interim trail solutions be implemented until such time as the commission directs staff to reprioritize rail?
as of now, for the short term and the near term, so around 2030, we are currently working on designing the interim trail facilities, but I guess, yeah, I don't know if things could change before 2030, but that's where staff is directed to at this point. But yeah, Grace, I don't know if you have any background if things could change before then.
I think that's a really good question. And we would defer to our board. As a staff person, the way I would look at it is we are doing our due diligence to look at the options for resiliency for an interim trail only, as well as a passenger rail only. I mean, no, sorry, passenger rail and trail. So we'll be providing both of those concepts to the board. And one way I would think about it is if we think as staff and as a consultant team that there are benefits to investing in infrastructure that allows for a short-term interim trail only, but then also doesn't prevent or there's a cost savings for any type of infrastructure that would support a future passenger rail, we would present those as well when there's kind of a combined investment. But we don't have that information now, but I would think that we would present that to our board if there was cost savings in terms of how we constructed, for example, a viaduct that didn't prevent a future implementation of passenger rail, and there was a large investment up front for interim trail. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but as transportation planners, we're always looking at ways to stretch the dollars for the short and the long term types of investment. So we would present that information to our board if we saw opportunities for that.
Okay. Thank you both again. And I do believe at this time that is all of the questions. We do want to thank everybody for participating this evening. And as a reminder, RTC is hosting 2 upcoming community workshops. Though, as Amanda mentioned previously, those will be held on June 9th in Aptos and June 10th in Watsonville. We encourage everyone to join us at those as well. We'd be happy to answer more questions and get your feedback at that meeting. And additionally, to stay up to date with the project, please visit the project website and join our mailing list. The project website is included here on the screen. And again, thank you for participating this evening. And we will see you at the next one.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.